We are in 1 Corinthians 8. Bahari and Gerald did a great job, right? Like, they did a fantastic job. One of the things that I wanted to, everything's kind of tying together. One of the things I didn't do all along when I was reading through these, when we get to verses that say some things like, now concerning. Oftentimes he was saying this, and I was not making the point to tell you guys as we went through all this, is every time Paul goes, now concerning, and then he announces the topic, it was kind of a response. What we don't get is this 1 Corinthians is actually probably 2 Corinthians. There was a lost letter in between, so there were several exchanges between Paul and this church over the years, and so when Paul's writing back, he's answering direct questions or direct things that presumably they had asked him about. So he's not just randomly like shooting from the hip with these topics. They are probably very specific, pointed topics that they asked him about. So as I've been going through this, I haven't been introducing each topic. So this morning, I'm kind of making it a point to say I've messed up and say this is another topic. Bahari did a good job because he did point it out, because he made it sound, he talked about the fact that there's assumed knowledge and other things, other parts of the conversations. I did not do a good job. But so today's topic, now concerning food offered to idols. We know that. So most of you that woke up this morning not really concerned about food offered to idols. This is not something that we have in our modern day context. Why is there so much concern for them? So let me kind of break down the context a little bit. So back then, I told you about the fact that like super pagan society, they had many gods that they worshiped, super indulgent in everything in life, whether it be food or pleasures of physical kinds kind of thing. That's the society that they were in. And it was all sanctioned, government approved kind of stuff. So they had these temples where priests would get, meat would come in or different animals would come in, and they would sacrifice these animals to these crazy made-up gods all over the place. And these priests, they may get 5 or 6 sacrifices in a day, and part of the portion of it is for the priest. And they can't eat that many meals in one day. So what they would do is they would take their meat and they would turn around and they would sell it at like a discount. So they would have like these discount meat grocery stores, if you will, or they'd have like these temple restaurants that you could go and sit down and have barbecue with your friends. So think about it also in this way, that the temple stuff that they did, these pagan temples, that was like their community civic centers back then. Like that's where everybody kind of hung out and did stuff together. So, and it wasn't like a minority. It was like everybody, like that was the majority of people worshipped all these gods. The Christians were in the minority. Christians were brand new on the scene, just now starting to become a faith. And Paul's kind of swimming up against the tide of all these pagan gods that are going on. So it had an impact for the people. So keep in mind, like the Church of Corinth was probably full of pagan converts. They weren't just Jewish people that converted. They were probably lots of like people that, if you think about it, they've probably spent maybe decades of their life, potentially, worshiping in these dark, awful things, like sacrificing these gods. Like if you read about all the different gods, like some of these sacrifices they're gross. They're beyond disgusting. And they're kind of tied into like what I would think is somewhat demonic. When you read it, you think to yourself, there's got to be like, there's some demons behind some of this stuff. It's so evil sounding. So if you were tied to this your whole life, and it puts you probably in a dark place to think about the fact that people are eating these discounted meat or whatever. It's not just something. Like it's not like going to somebody's barbecue. Like it would affect you if you were taken and rescued out of something that was a dark place in your life, and then all of a sudden you saw like Christians going and still eating that meat or going to those places, eating at those restaurants kind of thing, if you will, and you would react probably. So that's what's going on. There's like this debate within the church of Corinth where some are saying, well, hey, these idols, they're nothing. They're just meat. And then there's others that are like, no, that's what these dark, evil forces are attached to. You should abstain from it. So there's this battle that's going on, and Paul's going to address this and head this right on and try to like resolve this battle within the church. But I'm trying to like create the mindset of like what boycotting this meat must have meant. Like, so economically, like the Christians who were boycotting it, like it was an economic impact because they're not getting discounted meat. For those Christians who thought they were like, who cares? It's just meat to nothing. Like, they're doing it, but it's now affecting the people that were boycotting it. So you see there's this clash. And it's going to play out over and over again as we read this. And Paul's going to argue, really his bottom line up front here is Paul's going to argue that people matter more than cheap meat, really, or any kind of discount steaks. So like that's really what Paul's going to go with. So why does this concern us? So again, you guys woke up this morning not really concerned about what meat you're going to eat today or where you're going to buy it from. So how does this play into us? So I think some of the timeless universal principles that kind of go into us is we may have knowledge of something, and it may impact somebody if we do something in front of somebody else. And when we do that, like, yeah, you may have no problem with it, and it doesn't cause you to go or be tempted to go back into some kind of sinful pattern of life or something in your background. But it may cause somebody else who's not quite as strong of a believer as you to basically stumble. And that's really where the heart of the matter is. So Paul's going to argue that we should protect these weaker faith people and have consideration in all the things. Yes, we have freedom to do things, but it doesn't mean we should do it all the time. So I've kind of given you most of the sermon up front here. And really, it's going to come down to knowledge. What do you have knowledge of? And some people have more knowledge than other people, and that's what we need to be mindful of. So another kind of like, here's another example before I get into this. So alcoholics, right? Anybody, you probably have met somebody who's been an alcoholic in your life. Would you just openly drink in front of somebody who's an alcoholic? Wouldn't that's harsh to do that, right? That you don't do that. You kind of get the mentality like you could cause them to slip. They see you as a Christian doing it, like, and Jesus turned water into wine. Jesus drank alcohol, I believe. So is it right? Yes, you have the right and the freedom to do so, but it is destructive for other people who are addicted to it. And really that could go for any addictive behavior. If you do something that's not necessarily a sin, but it is for somebody else because they get knee deep, they don't have self-control over it, like you participating in that thing could make them go deep into something and thinking, well, if they think it's okay, then I guess it's okay for me. But it may not be for them because it's destructive to them where it's not destructive to you. So context matters. And I think that's what Paul is trying to bring about. So I'm going to try to bring up as many like modern day examples of what I think like us being able to indulge in something could actually cause somebody else to stumble, if that makes sense. So I think there are more, and I think there's ways that we need to be very clear that we need to be careful about our choices. We can't just be randomly picking things. We have to understand that there are impressionable people around us and that they could be under our influence to some degree if we're not careful. And I think that's really the big part here. Another example, so dressing modestly, like some women, like, hey, yeah, you have the freedom to dress however you want to dress. But not dressing modestly, you could cause a brother to sin. And, why do that to them? Why damage them kind of thing? So your behavior, yeah, true, it's not hurting you, but it's hurting somebody else who may have a problem with that. So you have the freedom, but it's causing sin in other people. So be careful about how you go. So perceptions do matter, and perceptions do make harm to others at times. All right, so let's get into it. I'll go back to the meat example here, and I'll keep trying to tie it back in together. So now concerning foods offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. So he doesn't even introduce the topic of meat here. Notice, like he says, I'm going to start talking about meat offered to idols, but notice how he takes a step back in his argument and he starts talking about all of us possess some kind of knowledge here. In other words, And this is really kind of a popular slogan. You remember, they were all Greeks, so they were very much into their intellect kind of stuff. And there was this intellectualism that kind of happened and ran through the countryside for them, especially in the Greek philosophers. He's basically saying some of us have theological credentials. In other words, some of us can be kind of puffed up in our knowledge. And we can know things like, for example, that idols are fake and they're not real. And you can have freedom to eat them. But that knowledge is kind of puffed up. But he says, but love builds up. So he's making a contrast between knowledge and love right away. So why is he doing this? One, I think he's setting the stage, and I think it's kind of brilliant. Like, before he even gets into the argument he's making, he's trying to establish that love is the thing that should guide us. Like, that's the outcome we should be seeking for in any of our debates. You got two sides of the church right now that are hot and debating heavy over this. And Paul's like, let's try to agree here. No matter who's right and wrong, let's try to agree that the ultimate outcome is we're trying to love each other at the end of the day. So he's establishing those ground rules, I think, right here by talking about this knowledge part here. I think built up, I think, like, when you think of love building up, think of like a foundation, putting bricks on top of something, architectural, like foundations. That's the foundation that Paul wants to start with. He wants to start on a house that is built on love. So you can have knowledge, but it can inflate you. If you have love, you're building something. Notice the difference there. He's making that contrast, and he's making it very strongly. Paul doesn't say knowledge is bad here, just to be clear. Knowledge is something we should seek, and he agrees with the people with the knowledge here in the verses to follow, and you'll see that. What he doesn't agree with is that knowledge and how it affects the vulnerable people around them, and that's what Paul's going to get to. So he's setting, I think, almost a kind of a know-it-all trap. You ever meet somebody that just seems to know it all and they want to tell you everything that they know it all? I think there's a side of the church here. They're feeling very strong in their theological arguments, and they want to show it off in their argument stance. And I think Paul's going to be like, yeah, you may be accurate in your doctrine, but you're kind of a jerk, is almost kind of the tagline that's going with that. You can have facts, but you can miss the heart of God completely. And that's what Paul's really concerned about here. Just because we have, maybe the argument is right on our side, doesn't mean that we're following after the heart of God. You can take doctrine that is true, and you can use it and wield it like a weapon and actually do harm with it. And that's kind of a mind-blowing thought if you think about it, because if you have truth, you would think, I just want to spout the truth everywhere I go. But that's how you deliver the truth matters. I mean, some people can only handle teaspoons of truth at a time. Imagine giving a toddler or a young child all the truth about all the things in the scripture all at once. They can't handle it. It will be overwhelming. So we give them right size. And the same is true for even adults who are new believers. Just because they're adults doesn't mean they've handled all the complexities of Christianity. And sometimes you have to handle the truth with care around them, because it could hurt them. It could damage them in some ways if you're not careful with it. So intellect and spiritual arrogance, they don't always communicate love, right? Just because you have the intellect, just because you have the knowledge, it has to come with love. And that's what Paul's trying to get after here. So we need to be careful how we handle the truth. So the last part here, it says, if anyone loves God, he is known by God. So the equation here is love God, and you're known by God. I love this. The real honor is not your intellect. It is the fact that God knows your name, right? If we go into every argument with facts and bombarding people, that's really not the big deal here. The big deal is the fact that God loves you both at all. And that's what we should carry after. So Paul, again, he's arguing from a position of love. So don't argue or debate somebody over idols and meat offerings from a position of hate or I'm right, you're wrong. Argue from a position of love and try to figure out, where can I help this person most? And that's what Paul's going to do. He's starting from that premise in the debate right off the beginning before he even starts into. The natural position we should always come into in a church when we disagree, the outcome should always be love. We can disagree all we want inside this church, but at the end of the day, we better be loving each other when we're done. And that's not always easy, right? All right, so here we go. Verse 4, therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, and that there is no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods, lowercase g there, in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. So the principle here, again, he's trying to say through love, he's trying to say these things. He validates the position of the people that were basically taking the side that meat doesn't matter. So some of you could read this, and if this is all he said, you'd be like, okay, fire up the barbecue, let's go, right? That's what the mindset would be. The people that are receiving this, that are buying the discounted meat, are loving these words, and they're receiving it well. So, I mean, Paul says objectively, like there's zero spirituality to these fake gods. So they have no power. It is nothing. There's no contamination to these meat. It means nothing. So Paul totally validates what they're thinking. And he quotes the Jewish Shema. If you're not familiar with that, this is in Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And he uses portions of that throughout this passage. And he's constantly going back to the fact that there's really only one God that has power. And it's our God, the God that created us and made us who we are. He even kind of mocks the so-called gods. And there's no real divine power in them, the way he's saying there are many fakes out there is what he's kind of alluding to. So even though he says all these things, I want to keep you in mind, though, like for the people that came from that world, they probably believed that there was power at one point. And for them to get over that hump and to realize that there was no power, that's hard for some of those people. Like, I have met many superstitious people. I meet Christians who are even superstitious. I have met ones on the ball field. When they start winning games, they won't change their socks and underwear and do like weird things. Like they only spin around a certain time if they got a double. If they, superstitions abound. People have them. Are they real? No, of course not. Hard work is what's real, right? That's what makes things happen on the ball field. So these so-called gods and these things, I still think people are affected by it. There's like this psychological and social conditioning that happens to us sometimes when you get caught up into something. And the occults are really good at this. Like they really get people, like they're traumatized. And it's tremendous work to get them out of that kind of culture. So the fact that they could have devotion for God and only God is kind of a big deal for people. And Paul, I don't think he's disagreeing with that. I'm just trying to say, even though he's making these arguments that it's so-called gods and all this stuff, and he's kind of downplaying it a little bit, these Greeks and Romans, they're saturated with these gods in this culture. There's just so many of them. And to go from that to one is kind of a big deal. Because your average citizen during this time believed in many gods. So you are not average anymore. You are like kind of outsider, kind of different from everybody else. If you start leading a life that is distinctive in Christian life, it becomes different. And quite frankly, it happens to us too. Like you will notice, like when you become a Christian and you are following the ways of the world and you start trying to shave off those things of the world, like your non-Christian friends they're going to try to keep pulling you back into going out and doing things that you probably ought not to be doing, right? Or using language or seeing things that you shouldn't be seeing. Like there's all kinds of ways that people draw us into sin, right? So not trying to underscore the way that Paul's making this argument by any stretch. Like Paul's clearly saying none of it's real, but it doesn't mean those non-real things don't have a real effect on people. They certainly do. And he's going to basically get into that more. Verse 6, he says, yet for us, there's one God. And he's very concerned that everybody understands that there is really only one creator, only one God of the universe. And we get to pray to him, and he wants to hear from us. That's the God that we go after. And we exist for him. He's very clear about that. All things were made by him, and then we exist for him. If you walked in today wondering, what is my purpose in life? Well, you exist for God. That is your purpose, to glorify him. That is why he created us, as to be in relationship with him. So again, the readers that read this probably were like, okay, fire up the grill. We're right. You're wrong. Nah, 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 boo, boo, kind of thing, right? That's not where he says. There's a yes in here, but there's like a yes, but is what Paul's going to. And here's where he's going to kind of drop the hammer on them. Verse 7. However, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through former associations with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that the right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. So here it is. He's bringing the hammer down. He's like, yes, but. He says, I think this is the most important part, where he says, not all possess this knowledge. In other words, the ones that with the strong knowledge, the ones that intellectualized and got superior and high and mighty in their theology and their doctrine, they were like, it's not real. Why do you guys care? It's not a big deal. So Paul's like, but they don't possess that knowledge. They might be just new in the faith, and they might not be as strong as you. And he's very clear about, their faith could be you could take your liberties, and it could be causing great harm to those who had very weak faith. So he forces the strong believers to think about the real world implications of what they're doing, the cost of their actions before doing something in front of somebody with weaker faith is what's going on. And this is something we should all do. We should all pause. If there is something that we're doing that could cause somebody to go into sin, we should pause and think very hard about, maybe I could give that up in my life. Maybe I don't need that in my life. Even though it's not sinful for me, even though it's not hurting my relationship with the Lord, it could hurt my brother who does struggle with that, then maybe it's not worth doing in front of them or at all, depending on what it is. So again, if you spent 30 or 40 years in a pagan temple, this is going to affect you to watch a Christian eat this meat. To them, there was a spiritual thing. To them, it looked like spiritual treason for you to eat that meat. Like once they became a Christian, and the thought of going back to that world was like, oh, how could you, kind of thing. They're like, you're treason. So they kind of probably they probably thought they had the strong position, the weaker faith people. But I think they still carried, if you did decades of doing these dark arts, you probably carry some shame and some guilt with you. And it's probably hard to just shed that. It's not just like something you just throw behind you and forget about. It's probably something that's still lingering in your heart a little bit. So there's a temptation, I think, to them, if they ate this meat, to go back to those dark practices. So, of course, they want to stay away from it. So you can be right in your stance, but you can be destructive. So Paul's like, don't be that guy. Don't be destructive by ignoring the potential risk of influencing others around you, kind of thing. So verse 8, it says, food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do it, and we are no better off. Paul's kind of making, again, kind of the argument that food is neutral. Food has no power in this. You're not stronger, you're not weaker. It means nothing. It's a neutral thing. Paul says food has zero bearing in your status with God. Thank goodness, right? Right? You're no worse off, you're no better off. It's completely neutral is the point here. But in verse 9, he says, but take care, because even if it's neutral, your actions still can be a stumbling block. And if you think about what Jesus said about stumbling blocks, Jesus said, it is better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck, thrown into the sea. A millstone was one of these things that they grinded wheat on. It was big and it was heavy. And if you put a millstone on it, it'd be like, imagine the guy with the chain with the big ball anchor on him going down to the bottom of the sea. That's really what Jesus was painting that picture of, somebody just boop, going into the water and not coming out, and you would never be able to swim to the surface. You'd better off dead, is really what Jesus is saying, than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. That's how strongly God feels about us influencing others to sin. Even though it may not be sin for you, if you cause somebody to stumble, it's very bad in the Lord's eyes. So kind of keep that in mind. You don't want to trip others up and cause them to have some kind of spiritual harm. So verse 10, for if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged? If his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols, and so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died, thus sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak. You sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. So verse 10, let's break it down a little bit. So Paul spells out this hypothetical scenario, of course, which I've been saying over and over again. You go in, you eat this meat, and somebody is now encouraged to do the same thing. And they see you do it, and they're like, oh, I must be okay. I'm just going to do it. It's harmless. But the thing is, it was harmless for you, but it wasn't harmless for them. It's like the alcoholic. You may be harmless taking a drink of a beer, and it doesn't do anything. You don't have to wake up in the morning and desire another drink in the morning. But that alcoholic, he can't stop thinking about it. It's destructive for him. It's very harmful for him. That's just one scenario, right? Eating meat, in this example, is kind of like peer pressure. In the opposite way. You're showing this vulnerable, weak Christian that it's okay when he is not going to do well with it if he continues on that same path that you went on. You may be able to eat it just fine, but they are destroyed. Notice all the adjectives: destroyed, wounding. This wounding, though, the word there is to strike somebody, to punch somebody. Causing somebody to sin is like hitting them, and it will destroy them. It's another word there, ruined or corrupted. They're broken spiritually inside. You don't know what baggage people are carrying a lot of times. So the things we say and our actions and our words and how we do things, even our entertainment choices, let's just put that out on the table, right? Even some of the things you have the right to watch it. I'll just be very clear. The Bible is rated R. There are some really graphic, horrible things in here that would not be above the rated R of Mike Mark. And so are some movies, but that doesn't mean we partake in every single movie that's out there. Some people struggle in the mind and trauma and all kinds of things. I mean, some people had backgrounds where they had abusive homes, and then you go watch some movie it's very abusive. That, it connects dots that don't need to be connected. So be careful about, again, the influences of what you entertain yourself with. Again, there's probably a number of other things. Weddings. Would you go to a same-sex wedding? Now all of a sudden, your person who is a Christian, who came from that world, who struggles with that sin, now all of a sudden feels like, well, maybe it's okay. He attended a wedding. Well, no, it's not okay. Morally, it's wrong. It's just as wrong as stealing, or just as wrong as any of the other sins that are in the Bible that are mentioned. But yet somehow you've encouraged them in some way. So be careful. Your actions could lead to somebody's destruction if you're not careful. And it says here in verse 12, it says, thus sinning against your brothers, wounding their conscience, it says, you sin against Christ. Be very, that's as clear as Paul can get, right? It's not just their sin anymore. Now, all of a sudden, it's your sin. You may not have been the one that was struggling with lust or whatever that person was struggling with, but because they went into this corrupted, spiritual, broken state, and you're over here thinking you're just spiritually fine, Paul's saying, think again. You're accountable for that person's sin now, because you influenced that in such a way that you are now a sinner, which is kind of that's a heavy responsibility to put on us. But again, Paul's desire here, he's seeking protection of those who are weaker in faith. That's really his ultimate goal over and over again. That's what he's trying to argue here. He says, are you seriously saying that your right to eat specific meat is more important than the person Christ gave his life for? That's fill in the blank. Are you seriously saying whatever this personal liberty is that you do in your life is more important than somebody's spiritual well-being that Christ gave his life for? If that's not the question on the table, you have to consider, what is it in my life that I'm doing that I need to stop doing because I know for sure that others are going to fall into sin if I keep doing this? That's the question we need to pause and ask ourselves. If there's anything at risk here that a vulnerable person could lose because they saw me doing this, probably not. I shouldn't do it. It's a good question to pause and ask yourself. Your influence will cause others people to sin if you're not careful. And Paul wants you to protect the weaker in faith. And this really just perfectly echoes another parable that Jesus said, whatever you do unto the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you've done unto me. Conversely, whatever harm you do to them, you've also done to him. Think about it that way. If I cause somebody to sin, I am harming Christ right then and there. I'm doing it unto Christ. So Paul himself says he would eat the food earlier. Now he says in verse 13, I will never eat the meat. I'll go vegan if I have to, is what Paul says. I don't think he actually did, but I think the idea behind it is he was so for saving the life of others that he was willing to sacrifice anything in his life to make sure that those people would stay saved and not stumble in their faith. So what applies to you today? That's really the question I keep trying to get back to. What addictions, what entertainment things, what are the things in your life that you probably could do without more of because it's causing other people to go into sin? What choices are you making that are causing other people to walk away from God? Think about that very carefully. Parents, you think that sometimes that your kids aren't watching you? They are sponges. They watch everything you do to the point where like it's embarrassing at times because when they go to do something and you as a parent be like, why are you doing that? And then they turn around and they point the finger back because I saw you do it. That is humiliating as a parent. And I've experienced that shame more than once, sadly. I wish I had never experienced that. But that's the feeling that we should have every time we take actions in our life. There are tripwires out there that are going to cause harm if we keep going down them, and it's going to influence others. Does the person matter more to you than the thing it is that you want to do? And I hope the answer is no. There's no liberty, no freedom out there that I want to partake in that means more than a weak, vulnerable person who's struggling in their faith. I can give up all my liberties if it means saving that person's faith and that they stay stronger because I didn't influence them to sin. That's where we land this morning. So that kind of pretty much closes out this chapter. We're going to go to chapter 9 next week. Chapter 9 is highly connected to this. As Gerald said, read ahead. Please do. I'd come with your mind ready and sharpened. And I appreciate all the feedback when people have other things to say about these passages at the end of the service. I love hearing those things. It encourages me that you're that engaged to come back and tell me things I didn't see. And that's awesome. So let's pray there.